Hi, welcome to Tales of Dread. People have been crazy about dinosaurs ever since the first Jurassic Park movie came out, but there aren't enough scary dinosaur movies, games, shows, or books. Let's face it, big lizards and snakes are scary. But what if some of them are still alive right now? Well, these unfortunate people say they've seen dinosaurs in the present day, just like in this video. So enjoy, but don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now, let's start. Anonymous, caught in a storm. We had no idea that it was going to rain so hard. My wife and I decided to leave for Texas to see family close to midnight. We had taken this trip many times before, but it had never been quite this scary. Where Arkansas ends and Texas begins, you start to see less mountains and more flatlands. Even though I like the beautiful views in Arkansas better, the vast fields and clear-cut forests in northern Texas can be a breath of fresh air, but I don't think I'll ever be able to look at them the same way again. I can't remember exactly which town we were in when it started to rain, but I do know that the thick forests and wheat fields on either side of the road were moving in the wind as if they were happy about the much-needed rain. No problem. As I drove through the rain at night, I thought, ain't so bad. I even thought it was quiet. When the rain got louder and louder by the second until the torrent washed over the windshield, we were scared. So much so that the windshield wipers couldn't keep up. They soon stopped being useful. Almost no one could see. I only went 5 miles per hour until we saw some reflections. My headlights got caught on the fake surface of an old empty building. Carefully, I drove my car under the rusted awning in front of the abandoned building. As soon as my car went under the metal shelter, I could see again. I turned the lights off. I finally gasped as I looked around at the storm. The storm was a supercell. Along the road, the ditches had turned into rivers, and lightning struck every other second. Treetops. Thunder was so close and so loud. The natural fear of it all made my skin crawl. We both knew at that point that the storm had us in its grip. We had no choice but to wait under that rickety building, hoping that the water wouldn't rise high enough to wash us away, or that the wind wouldn't tear down our rusty, shaky shelter, pretending that we were more than just fear. We talked about the storm with my wife. Wah! You ever seen one like this? I rubbed my sweaty cheek with my hand and asked her. Not at all, and even less. Been caught in a similar one. She moved visibly as another bolt of lightning shook the ground and the sky. The car's entertainment system was turned on. There was no clear radio signal coming through at all. Luckily, I had a few podcasts about conspiracies and history on my phone, and the Bluetooth worked perfectly. We killed time by learning about the past of the Italian mafia. Then we learned about the effects of lead in the water systems of the United States in the 20th century. We did this while looking out at the storm and never once thought that the rising floods and exploding lightning might be the least of our worries. It stopped raining, thundering, and lighting up. The sky was still very dark, like it was the end of the world, but the clouds seemed to have stopped moving. The chaos stopped so quickly that I forgot to take a breath. My eyelids pulled back so hard. I'm sure they could have broken even if my heart had slowed down. The terrible fear had turned into confusion. What's going on? The sudden question from my wife brought me back to life. I took a deep breath and blinked 6 times. I'm not sure. I said, perhaps it's over. She shut her eyes tight. Honey, something just doesn't feel right. We might want to leave even before she says so. My hands are so tight on the wheel. Even though my body was begging me to leave, my knuckles had turned a ghostly white. I couldn't make myself press down on the accelerator. Can you hear me? We should... She stopped in the middle of her sentence. A sharp gasp came out of her throat, and she put both hands over her mouth. I didn't like how quickly my eyes found hers. I didn't have to look long before I saw it too. Next to the broken-down building in front of us, there was a huge shadow on the road. It was about 20 feet tall. At first I thought it was a building that had just shown up out of nowhere. Perhaps I didn't see it before. But when I looked at this silhouette for a while, I could see small movements, the kind that every living thing makes, even when it's trying to stay still. And it was obvious. It was alive and trying very hard to stay still. We were there, so it knew. I'd never seen anything so big and shaped like that before. My brain was having trouble making sense of the shape. Maybe it was too dark to tell for sure. The only thing I knew for sure was that I shouldn't move or make any noise. Something deep inside me told me that letting people know about us would be terrible. I could hear how hard my wife was trying to hold her breath. 1 minute, 2 minutes, and 5 minutes went by in silence. Then there was movement, which was very scary to see. As the creature poked itself, what looked like its head bent down a little, and a limb on its left side moved up a little. I knew what I was looking at because I had birds my whole life up until a year ago. A bird, a huge, strangely shaped and illogically big bird that was scratching its chest with an impossible-looking long and thin beak. I had no idea how it could have lifted its wing, since its wingspan would have been 30 or 35 feet. My heart beat faster and faster, and with each pounding beat, I felt a sharp pain all over my body. Was this real worry? I understood that death was close and more real than I had ever thought. Knowing that if they took one breath too deep, they could be eaten by something bigger than the awning we were sitting under. I wanted to shiver, but my mind wouldn't let me move or make a sound of any kind. When my deepest fear woke up, it did everything it could to keep me alive. When the headlights came on, I couldn't breathe. My wife must have felt differently about this creature than I did because she was just staring at it in horror. She was scared and thought that all we could do was try to scare the animal away. She reached over and turned on the headlights by flicking a switch. The car was pointed close enough to the creature that the beams showed almost everything about it. It had a thick layer of dark, ragged fur all over its body. A creature with wings and a beak almost as long as my car and talons that tore through the asphalt. It stood up when it saw our car's lights. The thing wasn't scared. It had angry wings that were spread out in all directions. As the rain and lightning came back all around us, it showed us how big it really was. I thought my wife and I both screamed at the same time, but the sound of the chaos coming back drowned out everything else. With a twitch of my ankle, I almost slammed on the gas. As the tyres tried to get a grip on the gravel, they began to squeal. They did it soon enough, making the car lurch forward and then speed off. I went crookedly for the sidewalk, fell into and climbed out of the ditch, and dared not to look back. I drove toward the next patch of forest I could see from where I was parked under the awning. I could barely see it. I knew it was in this direction, but when the rain started pouring again, I couldn't tell how close I was or if I was even on the road. Then my wife started screaming next to me. Thunder boomed, and then a strangely strong gust of wind kept coming closer and closer. By the second, I could hear the beating of a creature's huge wings as it went after its prey. I could feel my toes digging deeper into the floor, as if the accelerator could still fall. The speedometer said 65, 75, and 90 miles per hour, but that wasn't fast enough. A shrill bird call that was as loud as a skyscraper falling down echoed through the car and my ribcage. Everything ended when my car started to flip over and roll quickly off the road. Left was right and down was up. Everything went black, and it felt like my insides were becoming my outsides. When I woke up, I was on my back and the top half of my head was in water. I tried to call my wife's name, which is Beth. I'm sure it didn't sound like much more than a quiet whisper. "Sir, everything will be fine. You were in an accident. Please stay still." As far as I could, I turned. The sharp pain in my neck made me wince, so that wasn't much. There was a man in a yellow coat who was kneeling down in the remains of a flood and talking to me. From what I could see, he seemed to be looking for a way to get me out. He must have been able to get me out of there, though, because the next thing I remember is waking up in a hospital with a broken arm, broken ribs, and my wife sleeping next to me. In what seemed to be an overcrowded hospital, our worried family gathered around us. Maybe we weren't the only ones who had trouble because of the storm and floods. Or it could have been the pandemic. I don't know, but it turned out I would be fine. Set a doctor who is very busy yet. When I heard that, my wife was out cold and I broke down. I remember that I cried. I felt like I was being hit by a wave of guilt. I was to blame. She was unconscious because I got scared and tried to get away from that huge bird. If I had kept my cool, she would have been awake. I told myself that after several weeks of physical therapy, my wife would finally wake up. On her shoulder, I couldn't be happier. I cried and asked for forgiveness for hurting people. She said with some trouble, "There's nothing to be sorry about. I made those headlights work. You did what you had to do to get us to safety." We both felt fine again after a long time. We didn't drive to get groceries because we had them brought to the house. A few months later, though we started driving sometimes during the day, we still don't drive at night, and when it rains, we hide in our bedroom with the doors and windows locked. Sometimes I wake up to the sound of heavy, rhythmic gusts outside. Thankfully, I'm always met with typical stormy skies or clear days, and no giant angry birds nearly killed by an appliance or from Georgie 8. When I went fishing in Australia a few years ago, I saw something that shouldn't have been alive anymore since 65 million years ago. It was like any other day in Australia. Clear skies, hot temperatures, and perfect weather. Overall, I chose to go fishing just to get better at it. I didn't really plan to catch anything and cook it. I would put everything I caught back in the ocean. I'd probably been out there for a few hours when something popped up about 70 yards from my boat. I couldn't tell much about it. I could only see the top of its head. I decided to go look at it to find out what it might be. I couldn't tell what it was because it was too far away. So I turned on the car's engine and walked over to it. As I got closer, the head started to look like a saltwater crocodile, which is what I thought of it as. That's when I realized it was one. Saltwater crocodiles do sometimes swim in the ocean, but I'd never seen one out here before. As I got closer to the croc, I noticed that it didn't look like a typical croc. Instead of having rough skin like a croc, this animal seemed to have very smooth skin. When I got closer, I saw that it wasn't a crocodile at all. No, this animal had grey skin that was really smooth all over. It looked like it had a crocodile's head, but it wasn't. It had sharp teeth that interlocked, a big body with what looked like foreflippers instead of legs, and a small tail with what looked like a fluke at the end. This animal looked like it came from the Jurassic World movies. Most people would just think that what I was looking at was a dinosaur, but I didn't. I knew this was some kind of marine reptile, maybe a saurus. The animal had to be longer than 30 feet. My boat was smaller than that, that's for sure. In that spot, Oris just kind of floated in the water next to my boat without moving or using its flippers. It seemed peaceful, if anything. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I didn't think what I was seeing was real. When I looked at the creature's head, its eyes immediately looked back at me. It went by so fast. The head of the ply, a saurus then shot up at me, and it almost jumped out of the water to get to me. I just barely stayed away from the jaws. The plesiosaurus snapped its jaws shut, and I saw it jump into the water head first. I wasn't going to stay there anymore. I turned on the boat's engine, and it shot away from where I had last seen the creature. I kept looking over my shoulder and saw a black shadow following me under the water. After being chased for about a minute, I couldn't see the shadow anymore. I've been to the same place more than once. I've seen the plesiosaurus more than once, but I haven't seen it since. However, I know that somewhere out there, it's still gliding under the surface, waiting for the right time to strike a pterodactyl. People are afraid of exactly that. But I saw a pterodactyl as big as a piper cup in the middle of the day in a city with more than 24,000 people in 1968 or 1969. I saw it. When I was 17 or 18, it flew straight west. I was alone, and no one was there to see it. I think it was a summer day. About 1 p.m., I went outside to my dad's car. No, I don't remember where I was going or why I went to the car, but I do remember that the sky was clear, with only a few clouds, and the air was so quiet that nothing could be heard. I could barely hear the few cars going by on the usually busy street a block away. Something in the sky caught my eye for some reason. I turned to my left, and about 20 feet above the trees, I saw something. Was this thing coming? As it got closer, I saw that it was a pterodactyl. I stood in awe. I tried to get anyone nearby to see it, but no one was there, not even a car driving down our street. As it got closer, I could see that it had a big head with a pointy tip and a crest on top. It had 20-foot-long wings that looked like bat wings. Every few seconds, they only flapped their wings once. The membranes were dark grey, and the legs were a brownish-red colour. It held its bat legs under its body and behind it. I saw that the feet had talons or claws. Its body was a dull brown colour, and had fur instead of feathers. Its tail was about 5 feet long and ended in a spade. I was able to see it for 20-30 seconds. I was scared for everyone. I could have brought someone with me, but there was no one. I asked myself, am I crazy? Is this really happening? So, when it was just behind me in the sky, I decided to yell at it. I yelled as loud as I could, hoping that someone else would hear me or that this thing, if it was real, would react. "Hey!" I yelled, and the thing turned its head, but not in the direction I was facing. About 2 seconds later, I yelled again, and this time it turned its head toward me, its mouth open, and its skin bluish-grey. I grabbed me. I really was scared. I thought about diving under the car, but then I thought that with those big teeth on that long bill, it could just grab me right out of there. Its bill was about 4 feet long, and when it opened its mouth, there was no empty space where teeth weren't visible. The mouth opened as it looked at me, and I didn't dare yell again. Its head and body were both a dull light brown, but the crest was more reddish, with a brighter red in the middle. The bill was more yellow, and those teeth were white. It turned its head back straight, shut its mouth, and then just kept going west. As I watched, I was amazed and curious about where it was going and where it came from. I kept an eye on it until it was nothing but a dot in the sky. Then I ran over to my neighbour's house and told my friend who was in his upstairs bedroom. I thought he might believe me because he had seen a UFO with me before. I didn't realise I'd heard this story before until I read it. The supposed creature in this story may not be a dinosaur, but it is still from the past. Spee32 says that something big and dangerous is hiding in the smallest lake in my neighbourhood. I live in southern Florida, and there are a number of lakes in my area. There are big lakes that connect to other big lakes, and there are also small lakes that only have one small canal and don't connect to any other waterways. I've lived in my neighbourhood, where I like to fish, all my life. I'm 15 years old as I write this. Yeah, I know you're probably thinking that, since it's South Florida, I shouldn't be fishing too much in those lakes. This will be very important. After that, I fished for about 7 years in these lakes. When I really got into fishing, I went to Bass Pro Shops, which is a place where you can buy all kinds of bait and fishing gear. Before the virus pandemic, I had just gone to get some fresh chicken livers to use for catfishing. This fish. We usually have bullhead, catfish and channel catfish for our play cars. The biggest fish in the lakes are channel catfish, which can grow to be about 3 feet long and cost $70. The day that changed my mind about these lakes happened about a month before I wrote this. That day I was quarantined and fishing was pretty much the only thing I could do. I had been fishing in the different lakes, which all connected to each other, for about an hour. When I decided to try my luck in the small lake that didn't connect to any others, the other ones didn't work out. In any case, I went there. This lake is most likely 150 feet long and 30 feet wide, so you can see how small it really is. By then, it was about 5-0, and it was slowly getting darker. I threw my fishing line into the water about 20 feet away and waited for it to sink. Catfish eat things at the bottom, after all. I played with my phone for about 5 minutes while I waited. Then I felt a sharp pull. After waiting, I set the hook. A small bullhead catfish, about a foot long, was moving around in the water a few seconds later. As I was bringing the fish to the bank, something I couldn't see pulled on my line so hard that the rod almost broke, even though it was a sewn 100 rod. When my line broke, I fell hard backwards. The catfish had disappeared. The rest of my line was the same. How could that have happened? How big is that catfish? I'd seen big catfish in this lake before, but never one that was so strong that it could break my line so easily. As I said before, South Florida was full of alligators, so you had to be careful. But all the alligators in this neighborhood have been killed and taken away from any possible leaks. Well, unless the people missed some, which I didn't think they did because when they were all gone, the people had caught about 50 of them, which is a lot of alligators. I can tell you, snakehead fish are an invasive species that have been eating the fish in our lakes for a few years. Couldn't have been my fault either, since my line was grated and strong enough to withstand teeth, and a snakehead can't use its muscles to break a 100-orb line. I wasn't caught on anything. Also, it was getting dark, so I decided to finish what I was doing and go home. Tomorrow, I could use more chicken liver. Anyway, I would wake up early and go back outside. Still, I just couldn't figure out what it could be. When I got up around 8 the next morning, I was ready to go again. I would start at the same lake where I almost caught the other catfish. I moved far away from the bank because I thought that an alligator had really eaten my catfish the night before. so it would be best not to go close to the edge. As I cast the line, I looked to my left and saw a dead bullseye snakehead, which was a surprise. The fish I talked about was cut in half. I didn't know what kind of animal could have cut off a snake's head like that, and I started to think about an alligator again. I set my line down for a moment and went over to the fish. It was cut in half and its guts were sticking out. I could see where the teeth had been. I could tell they had big teeth. Even if it were an alligator, it wouldn't have left the fish here. It would have eaten it right away if it had seen it. My neighbour, Mr. Tom, walked over to me out of the blue. "Hey son, I saw that fish last night when it washed up on the shore and the rest of it came along." A few seconds later, I asked if you thought it might have been an alligator. Mr. Tom gave a head shake. That's not something an alligator would do. Since they took them all away, I haven't seen one. Also, they would have gotten up to get some sun, which I haven't seen at all. There must be more fish. That was right. Every once in a while, an alligator or crocodile would have to come up to the surface to get some sun. Strange things were happening in this lake. Tom went back into his house after I thanked him. I went fishing for a while longer. Then I felt a strong pull again. I got a smaller blue catfish on the line. After about a minute, as I was taking the hook out of the fish's mouth, I happened to look at the water, and what I saw made me jump back. I could see a shadow sitting there about 5 feet from the bank. There are tall plants and weeds in the water, but none of them could be this shape. Also, the water is clean, so it wasn't just a bunch of trash. The shadow was very big. I swear on my life that the front of it looked like an oval with a flat head. This shadow had to be at least 25 feet long, and the water in this lake could go as deep as 40 feet. You might think I'm crazy, but I'm serious. This thing looked like it had fins on the sides like sharks, but these fins were bigger and wider than shark fins. I couldn't see much else as I tried desperately to find some kind of story. I then looked. When the last bit of shadow was gone, it seemed to slowly sink. When I looked at the catfish, it was almost dead and flopping around weakly. I looked down and saw that I had been staring at that shadow for a while. I quickly put the catfish back in the water, packed up my things, and got ready to leave, thinking that I probably wouldn't come back to this lake again. I heard something hit. I turned my head around and saw a big, greyish-coloured head juggling a catfish. I just got stuck in its teeth. I think it was the same catfish at least. The teeth in these jaws were at least 4 inches long and very sharp. All of a sudden, the head and the catfish went back into the water. I couldn't believe what I had just seen, and it made me feel sick. The head was not that of a shark or an alligator, and when I looked into what it could have been, I found out it was a prehistoric sea monster called the Dunkley Augustus. I couldn't see the creature's tail in the lake, so I couldn't match its body or tail to this dinosaur-like creature. So it could have been another thing. The teeth were different. They were not made of bone and looked like a guillotine, just like the Dunkley Augustus's teeth. If I saw it right, the creature in the lake had 2 rows of very sharp teeth. This monster was also between 20 and 25 feet long, about the same size as the prehistoric Dunkley Augustus, which was about 30 feet long. I have no idea what this thing was, but I've also stopped fishing in that lake. What I want to know is if it could have been a Dunkley Costus. How can that be, since it died out millions of years ago? And what the heck is it doing in a freshwater lake that isn't even as big as a normal canal? Could there be a way to get through? And why couldn't anyone else have seen it? There are so many answers. I would like to know. I don't even know what something like that would do to me, especially being able to tear apart catfish and the toothy snakeheads just in case when I fish in other lakes. I don't go near the bank, and when I throw back fish, I don't even put my finger in the water. Instead, I throw them back a good distance from the edge. I'm not making this up, so think what you want. But all I'm saying is that something is hiding in the shallows of even the smallest leak in my neighbourhood, and it's not a crocodile. I saw a dinosaur at Christmas on the 15th from Arsenal. It was the night before Christmas. As we did every year, my family and I were watching the Polar Express when the movie ended, and the credits started to roll. My mum told me to go blow out the candles on the windowsill. I did what she asked. I blew out the candles and reached up to close the blinds. Just as I was about to close them, though, I stopped and just stared at 4 small animals rolling around in the snow in the front garden. Except for their faces, hands and feet, they were covered in white feathers. They had thin beaks, 3 clawed fingers, and 3 clawed toes, but one toe was curled to look like the sickle claws of raptors. I couldn't see their eyes, but their skin was grey. They made fun of each other by snapping their jaws and tackling each other to the ground. I couldn't think of anything to say or do. I just stood there and looked at them, not sure if I was really seeing dinosaurs. I was so interested in these things that I didn't hear my dad talking to me. All I heard from my dad was, "Hey, what are you looking at?" I never took my eyes off of these animals. I told him in a whisper, "You need to see this." My dad got off the couch and came over to talk to me. I told him to look out the window, and he did. I watched as his eyes got bigger when he saw what I thought they were. My mum came over and asked us what we were looking at, and I nodded to show that I agreed. My dad turned his head and put a finger to his lips as he looked at her. He put out his hand to tell her to come over. My mum went to the window and gasped when she saw what was outside. We were all amazed. We couldn't believe that real dinosaurs were still alive after being thought to have died out millions of years ago. Still, they were in our front yard. I couldn't help but smile at what I saw until I heard my dad gasp and say, "What is it?" I couldn't help but laugh again. He pointed to the right, and I saw what he saw coming out of the forest. It looked like the mother, so that's what I thought it was. It must have been between 1.8 and 2 meters tall, and between 5 and 7 meters long. It had the same white feathers and exposed skin on the head, feet, and hands as the babies. It came out of the woods and walked into our front garden, where the kids were playing. As their mother came closer, the baby raptors caught their mother's heads. The mother wrapped her around them, then lowered her head and nuzzled the babies. This was a truly amazing thing to see, and it showed that even the scariest animals can be good parents. We were all amazed as the wrapped-up mother lifted her head and started to walk forward with her babies behind her. After that, the mother walked up to our porch. Then our front garden was lit up by the porch light. The mother stopped what she was doing and looked toward the porch light. She seemed to snarl at it, and her teeth were very sharp. The raptors were amazed at first, but then they got scared when the mother looked at us and couldn't move. We all just stood there, frozen with fear at what we saw. The mother hissed at us before turning toward the woods and running away with her babies. I couldn't sleep that night because of what I had seen. How could anyone even sleep? After seeing real dinosaurs alive, I was sure I heard snow crunching outside at 2:45 a.m. on Christmas Day. Someone or something was moving around outside quietly. I went to my window and looked out at the front garden, where I saw her again. The mother wrapped her up, and this time she was in the front garden without her babies. The big raptor walked over to the window. She had come back on her own. My parents and I had been too and looked inside before. To get a better look, I took out my phone and turned on the flashlight. It was a big mistake to do that, but it did get her attention. She was now looking up at my window. I quickly moved away from the window and ran to the corner of my room. My heart felt like it was going to burst. When I heard the scraping sound outside, I almost had a heart attack. I think it was trying to climb up. When I saw it in the moonlight, I could hardly take a breath. As the rapture got closer to my window, I heard a growl and claws scratching on the glass. The pressure was too much for the glass, and it broke, sending pieces all over the floor of my bedroom. The creature pulled its head and shoulders into my room and let out a loud roar. I yelled back, and then my door flew open. My father was standing there with a gun in his hand. He aimed and shot at the creature several times. The beast growled again before pulling itself backwards out the window and landing with a thud in the snow. It then ran into the woods. It's been a few years since this happened to me, but I still live in that house with my parents. Every Christmas I always wonder if I'll see those raptors again, because I swear I hear roaring and snarling coming from that forest from time to time.